Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric and our continuing series Model Museum, where I review every single Sega Model 1, Model 2, and Model 3 game in a retrospective fashion. That does not include arcade racing games because I did that last year. And today we are taking a look at Virtua Cop running on the original Model 2 board. And when I say this is one of my favorite Lightgun arcade games of all time, I 100% mean it. It's one of my favorite arcade genres of all time. And Sega 100% nailed it with Virtua Cop, giving us a lot of the staples of what this genre would become moving forward. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But when I first saw this game in arcades, I fell in love and I've been playing it ever since, whether it's on an original Model 2 board or on the Sega Saturn port, which is quite good and you should 100% check out. This game is just revolutionary in its use of 3D with fully textured polygons, and it does a lot with the design of a light gun game. You will see that every enemy has this warning indicator around them, and as it shrinks and goes from green to orange to red, that is when they're going to fire on you. It is such a simple quality of life feature to tell you what you need to target first, but this is where it basically comes from Sega. It is such a smart inclusion. Now there's one thing about this game that's definitely going to trip you up when you first play it, and that is the developers love to put characters at the edges of the screen. It is a little bit of a cheap game, I'm not going to lie, it definitely wants your quarters, but what arcade game does not? And you need to get used to looking around the entire screen and checking those margins, because a lot of times characters will show up off screen and their reticle will start shrinking before you can actually see them, and it definitely keeps you on your toes. But this game is just pure light gun action from start to finish, and it definitely kind of has that Die Hard or Lethal Weapon vibe going on. This was a big genre in arcades, not just the light gun arcade game, but the cops against robbers, and I think Virtua Cop did it about as good as you possibly can. Now there's other games in the same genre from Konami, things like Total Vice, which I absolutely love as well, but you cannot dispute that Virtua Cop really kicked off the genre in 3D, and we owe so much to it for doing that. And you will see that I just picked up an automatic there as well. You get different weapons. You can get a Magnum, an automatic, a rifle, or a machine gun, and they all have different uses. And learning those use cases and using them to your advantage is a lot of what Virtua Cop is. But of course, it's also boss fights, and I love all of the different boss fights in this game. And they get successively harder as you go from stage 1 to stage 3 and see the final boss, but each one has its own kind of hook. And I love that he's shooting these missiles at us, and you kind of have to cover that spread while also hitting the boss. But my favorite part is he gives himself up, he puts his hands in the air, but of course, like any action movie, he's got that hidden firearm in the back of his pants, and he's 100% going to draw it on you. It's basically action movie tropes to a T, and the developers at Sega 100% played around with that to really make this feel like an interactive action movie. Because of course, Sega didn't do this first. Sure, they did it in polygons first, but you had games like Lethal Enforcers in 2D using sprites to basically sell that same action movie vibe, and it is one of my favorite genres in the light gun subcategory along with horror games, and they are the big two. As we get to stage 2, it really does ramp up the action and all the interactability. You can shoot those barrels out and knock that water tower down onto enemies if they are there, and the screen is going to zoom in, zoom out, pan left and right. It's going to move basically everywhere to show you where you need to be focusing, and this game is going to throw a lot of enemies at you. You're not going to be shooting 1 or 2 or 3 people at a time. You can see 5, 6, 7, 8 enemies in a row, and the screen movement will telegraph where you need to be looking most of the time, so it is an intelligently design system. But as you get into later levels, that reticle is going to go from green to red very quickly, and you're going to need to be a lot quicker on the draw. Now I am playing this with a Sinden light gun and it works perfectly, but in arcades that light gun worked great as well. And that's one of my favorite things about Virtua Cop and light gun games in general. It's all down to your skill, your timing, and your memorization of patterns. And you can get good at these games and once you see them, because the enemies are going to come up in basically the same pattern every single time, so long as the board's difficulty is the same. But I will say, just like House of the Dead, this is some of the best music Sega ever put to a light gun game. So go ahead and listen for 45 seconds. I'll come back and tell you more about the history of Virtua Cop.
Help me! Automatic.
I love the music and it reminds me a lot of the House of the Dead, but do remember that this came out a full 2 years before the House of the Dead would ever exist, and we have Virtua Cop to thank for that franchise, and the House of the Dead is definitely my favorite Lightgun franchise of all time. And this game did continue. Of course, we're going to be talking about Virtua Cop 2 later on in this series, and you get Virtua Cop 3 as well on Xbox-based arcade hardware, and sadly that one never got a home port. But if you do want to play the Sega Saturn version, if you have a Saturn, you've never bought this game before, it is an excellent port. It's a slight graphical downgrade, but it works just as well, and it's got some full motion FMVs that are quite funny for the time and place, so you definitely should check out. But as we go even further into the game, I do love the difficulty curve in this game. It is never cruel, it is always fair. The first round, you could probably get through it with maybe 1 continue, maybe 0 if you'd played recently, but when you get further on, it's going to get more difficult, and you'll see there I did take my first continue of the game. It's just so much fun to learn these patterns. And it's just like a fighting game, just like any other game, every boss is going to have his own pattern, and once you learn to recognize that, you can basically shoot and be immune. Now, it's been some years since I played the original Virtua Cop, just hadn't gotten around to it, so I am a little bit rusty, but after this capture, I did play it like 3 or 4 more times, just because I wanted to see how far I could get into it. And that is the sign of a great arcade game, if it just makes you want to start right after you finish. Obviously for capture purposes I don't need to do that, but for my own fun it is amazing. And I do love this building is owned by the Evil Corporation, a very tongue-in-cheek joke right there. And of course it wouldn't be a cops versus bad guys game if there wasn't a gigantic office building that you needed to storm at the end. It is just one of those tropes of the genre, and it 100% works here. And it makes me kind of sad that we never got a Lethal Weapon or Beverly Hills Cop Lightgun game, because those would have been 2 amazing properties to make Lightgun games out of. Of course we got the Die Hard games, but they should have done that 100%. But again, if you take a look at this game just graphically, in 1994, this was absolutely spectacular. Texture mapped polygons on screen. It had only been a few years since something like the original Virtua Fighter came out with flat shaded polygons. This was such a massive leap in technology from one board to another, and this 100% blew away anything that was possible in your home console, in your living room or bedroom at the time. When you saw this game running, you thought you were seeing the future unfold in front of you, and that is because it genuinely was. A lot of people back then thought this must be the height of 3D graphics and they never get better. We know that's not true, but honestly, if they had never gotten any better than this, I could still 100% deal with that. I just love the look of Model 2. The polygons are good enough to be something that you can recognize, but they're not so amazing that they don't look a little bit cartoonish. And I love all of the colorways Sega chose. Even if you are shooting a bunch of bad guys, it's very bright and cheery. And you will see that there is a combo system. If you shoot the gun out of your player's hand, or if you shoot the hand itself, you get a justice shot. That's going to give you a better point scoring system, so there is a little bit of scoring mechanic in there if you don't kill the bad guys. But one more taste of music is my favorite track in the game, and I'll come back and tell you a little bit more about Virtua Cop. This is another iconic track, and I do love the office setting as well. I just wish that some of the stuff in the background exploded a little bit more, but of course you do get a secret door going in to the final boss of the game. And I will say this is a Sega game in arcades in the 90s, so you know it has some of the best voice acting ever recorded as far as dialogue and delivery is concerned. I'm going to let you listen to that in just a second, but trust me when I say I'm not making fun of it. I actually love bad voice acting, but listen to this line right here because it's pure comedy gold.
But now, you'll regret being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
That delivery and that reverb are spectacular, but we are in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I wonder what would have happened if we showed up the day before. But you just bought us a coffee and had a chat with us. All jokes aside, I love this. It's basically like fighting something out of the RoboCop movies, and there is another franchise that could use a modern Lightgun game. I would absolutely love to see that. And I will say, at least for the first form in this tank here, it is the easiest boss fight in the game, which is really funny because it is saved for Stage 3, the hardest stage in the game. But of course, it's not the final boss, no. know, there is this guy in the helicopter. There's always one final boss in a light gun game, and this definitely presents a lot more challenge than the tank. The spread on all the projectiles is much wider, and you really need to be shooting left and right. And if you come into this boss fight like I did just with a 6-shot revolver, reloading is going to be such a big mechanic. You don't want to try to reload when those are coming at you, so accuracy is paramount. But of course, with unlimited credits, we're able to see the end, and he basically takes a Hans Gruber off the Nakatomi Tower, demise right down below. But I love in these games, doesn't matter how many people you shoot and how many bosses you shoot, they're always alive at the end of the game, and they're always being arrested, because it doesn't matter how many bullets you unload into them, they're always going to be fine. And I do have this little wrap up here, kind of feels like a daylight version of the end of Die Hard. But I can't say enough about Virtual Cop. Not only is this Sega's first 3D polygonal arcade light gun game, and it is amazing, it also paved the way for the House of the Dead franchise. And of course there's 2 other games after this, one we'll be talking about on the series. But I'm curious where you first got your start with Virtual Cop. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if you played it on the Saturn, PC, arcade, or otherwise. I played this first on the arcade version, and then I very quickly got a Saturn when it was released, and I still keep a copy of this game in my studio next to my PVM and my Saturn so I can play anytime I want. But we beat the bad guys and we're done. Bye bye.